What's up, guys? Jeff here with Grit City Fitness and Performance. Today I want to talk to you about 4 simple reasons why it's important for you to be tracking your macronutrients or tracking your food consumption, especially when you first start a fitness program or fat loss phase. Now, a lot of times people come up to me, they say, Jeff, I don't want to track my food because it's a lot of work and it's a pain in the ass. And I 100% agree with you on that. However, there's a specific reason, or actually 4 reasons, why you should be tracking your food when you first start any sort of program or phase. And whether you've been in a program or a fat loss phase or you've been working with us for a while and you have yet to do it, this is important. Okay? Now, I do recommend everybody do this initially. I don't recommend them do it long term. Long term means anything longer than 6 to 12 months. The reason for this is because it's about a lifestyle. Now, if you're someone that's a bikini competition or a figure competitor or a specific athlete, then I definitely recommend taking it a little bit more extreme with your nutrition. Now, for the average client, for most of my clients, for you most likely, you're going to be sitting in the top 4 reasons on why you need to be tracking your food. Plain and simple. Let's start with the basics. Showing your work, okay? Now, when you were in math class in elementary, even middle school and high school, the teacher always told you to show your work. The reason for it was not because they wanted you to just show it, but they wanted you to continue to show your work so they could see any issues, errors, and make corrections, right? If I didn't show my work in class, I wasn't able to see where I went wrong. The same thing applies with your nutrition. If I'm not tracking my food, if I'm not tracking my information, I'm not showing the work. And when I'm not showing the work, I can't get true feedback on what I'm doing right and wrong. Okay? So it's important, right? The other reason is the more times, the more repetition you do of showing your work, the more you understand the concept, right? That's why they also did this in math. They wanted you to, one, subconsciously know what's going on, as well as visually see what's going on. So it was allowing you to make corrections or modifications to your answers because of the work that you were showing. Now, after so long, maybe in high school, college, currently, you don't need to show your work on some of the basic answers. You also don't need to show your work in general because you understand how math works. You understand how the numbers get to where they need to be. That's why it's important to track your information, especially initially. Think about tracking your food like being in school. We want to show our work as much as possible initially so we have a good understanding of what's going on. It will subconsciously train us to know how things are being fit into the day, where calories are, calories aren't, right? So if I eat 10 ice cream cones over the next 10 weeks from McDonald's, eventually I'm going to know that each ice cream cone from McDonald's is 150 calories. I'm also going to know that it's going to be, 4 grams of carbs and 5 grams of fat and protein, right? But that only happens by putting it in often, by tracking it and by doing the work and showing your numbers. All right. Number 2 is visual reminders. Anytime I talk to anytime I talk to one of my coaching clients, I ask them, hey, what have you been doing? They say, oh yeah, well, I've been doing this, this, and this, and this. But when I ask them and they show me their work, we have visual reminders of how good we are or how often we might fall off track. Right? So if the goal here is to eat or be consuming a certain amount of protein, you might say, hey, Jeff, I'm doing really well. But unless I can see your work, we don't know. And it's just a visual reminder to keep us on track and show us how close or far we are away from what we're ideally trying to go for. Number 3 is it helps us learn the habits and portions. All right? So again, going back to what I first initially said, the goal is not to be tracking our food long term in an overall tracking sense, right? I don't want to be tracking on MyFitnessPal for the next 10 years. However, I do want to be tracking initially because I'm learning the habits and learning my portions, right? Going back to that idea of the McDonald's ice cream cone. The more I eat the same thing and see how it's getting put in and how the numbers are equating over, the more I'm going to understand and learn the habits of portions. Right? So if I always eat 5 ounces of chicken breast, eventually I'm going to understand how big a 5 ounces of chicken breast is going to look like, right? Compared to maybe some objects, maybe even my cell phone. I might see 3 ounces of chicken breast and know that it's 3 ounces because I'm so used to seeing 5 that I know how big 5 is and how little 3 is compared. Right? But that doesn't happen unless I'm constantly tracking initially. Right? It goes back to showing your work. The other thing is I also learned the habits. I learned the habits of being good and responsive with putting and inputting my information. Okay? So it's not again, about doing it long term. It's about doing it to get the habits in. And then finally, the fourth, you can see and make corrections, right? If I'm not tracking my nutrition, especially when I first get started on any sort of plan, process, or program, I can't see what I'm doing right or wrong, and I can't make corrections. I'm guessing. It's like shooting a gun in the air, hoping that I hit a bird. Sometimes it works, if you have a lot of birds flying over you. Other times, you're shooting in the air and missing it. So it's important that you guys do this initially, so that way you can, again, show your work and learn how it all works together, as well as visual reminders for yourself on if you're doing good or bad, or what mistakes you might be making. You get to learn the habits and portions, so you get to learn how big things are, how small things are, how they equate over to calories by typing them in and keeping track of them initially. And then you can also see what you're doing and make corrections. So again, if you're losing weight, gaining weight, we can look back over the last week, 2 weeks, say, hey, maybe you're eating too much, maybe you're eating too little, maybe you're just taking in the foods at the wrong time. But none of this can be done unless we're tracking our food. Now again, we want to do this for a good amount of time initially, maybe 60 to 90 days, anywhere between 2 to 3 months, sometimes even a little bit longer depending on the person. But this gives us a very good baseline and start position to really go forward with our nutrition in a way that's easy for us to maintain long term, and a very good idea of what our portion sizes, our calorie breakdowns, our macros, what's protein, what's carbs, what's fat, how they equate over, and how your body feels in response to them. All these things can be played into a big role by tracking our macros and foods. All right, guys? If you have any questions on this, comment below. I'll be feel free to answer them. Otherwise, start tracking your food. And whether it's just, giving good ideas of what you're doing, or you're really, really diligent about it, start now and start working in the right direction towards this, and you'll have a lot more success when it comes to your weight loss, your body transformations, and even putting on muscle tone, because you're going to have a lot more ideas, you're going to have long-term success, and you're going to really understand this process.